The perspective we have at the minute is a left brain perspective on both hemispheres' abilities. By definition, the left brain's writing the protocols, doing the experiments, writing up the data. So even these definitions of specialized abilities are very much the left hemisphere's view of things. So in the traditional view of the right hemisphere, generally this very simplistic dichotomy of rational logic, speech as the left hemisphere, then something to do with creativity and generally way better memory, artistic ability to do context. Left hemisphere cannot do context. It looks at individual pieces. It's considered a specialized ability. Or is it just an incredibly limited inability to see the wider picture? The right hemisphere can see the wider picture. Some of the left hemisphere thinking is, yes, the right hemisphere can see context, it can't do individual elements. I don't necessarily think that's true. The left hemisphere will do everything it can. Things it can't do, it has to give way. So it will always handle detail. Doesn't mean the right hemisphere can't do detail. If you look at some of the shamanistic art or some of the savant art where people are accessing something phenomenal. Total context, whole picture, phenomenal detail, beyond anything the left hemisphere can do. So typically the right hemisphere can do everything the left hemisphere can do, usually in a different way and phenomenally better. But these ideas, this simple dichotomy is very much a left hemisphere idea. It's ascribing these specialized abilities often to things it cannot experience itself. Most of us don't have that ability to do context. But when you do tap into that ability, it feels way more functional than anything you can do in your normal state of mind. The simple dichotomy probably has a lot more truth in it, but not necessarily the way we've been told. They're not specialized abilities. You have the relics of phenomenal function in one hemisphere, and then these very reduced, very limited abilities in the other hemisphere. A lot of the literature on the kind of simple dichotomy changed in the last 20 years. A lot of people began to question this and say, actually, it's not quite that simple. Both hemispheres are involved, and for sure, while the left hemisphere may be in charge, it's always drawing from the right hemisphere. It takes a lot of credit for what the right hemisphere is contributing. I did this, I did that. Well, actually, in reality, the left hemisphere has very few abilities. It draws a lot of the really complex stuff from the right hemisphere. But some of the neuroimaging, a lot of people interpret the sort of advent of neuroimaging as saying, oh look, both hemispheres are involved in this task or that task. Really, they're working together. That's one interpretation. However, lights going off on a screen showing one hemisphere or both hemispheres working, it doesn't tell us what's making it through to our perceptual awareness. And we already have this dichotomy of our normal sense of self, which is vastly predominant. And we know there is another sense of self that we can tap into, whether it be savant-like skills, unusual perception, very different feelings. Those things are still incredibly rare. So just because the lights are going on, it's not telling us what's coming through to perceptual awareness. And I think there's a book come out quite recently by a chap called Ian McGilchrist. He's reviewed a lot of this data, and in my opinion, he's firmly put this simple dichotomy back on the sort of platform. It's no, there is a simple dichotomy here. And while neuroimaging is telling us something, there's a simple interpretation that they're both cooperating. It's not necessarily the case at all. There's activity there, but one hemisphere is still clearly predominating.